There you are. So you've now had the prompt that we're now recording this. This for Peace Direct is very exciting, and I hope it is for you too. Many of you will be joining us in Bogota. And even if you're not able to join us, I think a conversation about peace building and how peace building intersects with the Shift the Power movement is something that we've been looking forward to for a long time. And we at Peace Direct have felt that peace builders have a home at Shift the Power. And what we're going to do over the next 90 minutes is explore that. We're going to explore the challenges that peace builders face in their own contexts. We're going to look at what this means for Shift the Power. And we're also going to learn a little bit about how Shift the Power has evolved over the last few years. We're also going to invite you all to be active in this. So this isn't a show and tell. This is about you actively participating in exploring with us the challenges that you see in the system right now when it comes to peace building. And so we're going to have some an opportunity to get onto some jam boards. If you haven't experienced using jam boards before, don't worry. It's not too scary and not too intimidating. And we're going to try and pull all of that together by the end to try and feed into the conversations that are going to be taking place in Bogota. So there are still people joining, and welcome for those of you who are just joining. We're really looking forward to this this session. Please make sure that you contribute, be active. As I said, we want everyone's voices here, whether you're contributing through the conversation or putting notes onto the Jamboard. So really looking forward to kicking that off. But before we invite some of our speakers to share a little bit of their experiences, I would like to invite Eshban from Shift the Power, from the Global Fund for Community Foundations, to give us a little bit of an overview of what Shift the Power is, how it has developed and evolved over the last few years. So Eshban, over to you.
Thank you, Dylan, and hello to everyone from wherever in the world you are. My name is Eshban Kwesiga with the Global Fund for Community Foundations. So as a movement, I think that over the years, Shift the Power now means various things to various people, and I think that there's beauty in all those varied interpretations. But the hashtag first emerged in 2016 at the Global Summit for Community Foundations hosted in Johannesburg, and the follow-up event is the one happening next month in December in Bogota. And since then, it has kind of taken on a life of its own with many people, especially in the work of movements such as Black Lives Matter, Me Too, also feeling that the international aid system was long overdue for its own truth-telling moment. And since then, some of the perspectives that have emerged out of it, we've started to see the articulation of the fact that international aid as we know it is quite racist, dismissive of the experiences and knowledge that are not generated from the global north, also dismissive of resources that don't come from the global north. So in 2019, a group of organizations and people met in London to answer the question of what would it take or what would we need to build a system that works for everybody. So they came up with a manifesto for change, which I'm about to paste in the group in a minute. They came up with a manifesto for change, which is really a 9 manifesto points that are not a checklist, they're not standards, but rather ideas to offer inspiration rather than standards on what the system could start to think about as we reimagine international development as we know it. And since then, the spirit of the movement has been that no one person and no one organization can reform or change international aid on their own, and that everyone's voice, everyone's perspective in this whole thing matters, and it creates a varied and important vantage point to the conversations that we are having. So all this to say is that all of us are contributors to building a new system. We're building a new system for us, and a new system also designed by us. In a nutshell, that's a little bit of the history of Shift the Power and where it has come from since 2016.
Eshban, thank you very much for that. And thank you for putting pasting the link into the chat. I'll encourage everyone to have a quick look at that if you haven't looked at the manifesto. Eshban, I'd like to ask you, before we move on, you've seen how this has evolved. Could you have imagined where it would have gone back in, say, 2016 or 2019. How have you seen that growth, and what, you know, what's your reaction to the growth of Shift the Power?
So I wasn't around in 2016. I kind of joined the train around 2020, 2021. But since then, you know, I've seen the evolution as well, especially more and more voices from the global south, or from more and more voices, demand side voices, articulating what Shift the Power means to them, explaining and writing, as well as articulating how they've experienced international development from their own vantage point. And I truly believe that as more and more people become braver to talk about it, more and more vantage points will emerge. In fact, I don't think that we've fully, you know, had the full articulation of power as it's been experienced, and all the cracks and faults of the system as we know it, because there's still some voices, I think, that are yet to add their voice to this.
Thank you, Eshban. And you talked about vantage points there, and I think peace building is a new vantage point. I think it's another way of sort of participating and thinking about how power needs to shift. And I just wanted to speak to a couple of the manifesto points for those of you in the room who aren't familiar with the manifesto. So this is point 3, move away from a system that is preoccupied with quick solutions and that is premised on and organized around a transfer of funds. Change how we approach and seek to measure the notion of success. The 4th point is creatively find ways to unlock the inherent power of communities in determining their own development course, however they define it. And let the language of beneficiaries and recipients be a thing of the past. So as Eshban says, these are sort of principles rather than a checklist, a technical checklist. And this, for me, is really inspiring, because so many of these 9 points absolutely apply to peace building. And I think that's what's really exciting for the peace building community, is that this speaks to them. And that's why I hope we're all here. So we're going to now, and thank you, Eshban, for giving us a whistle-stop tour of how Shift the Power has emerged and evolved over the years. We're now going to invite a few speakers. So we have 3 speakers for you today. Lida Minasayen from the Women's Agenda. She's a wonderful Armenian peace builder. Patrick Steiner-Hirth from the Robert Bosch Foundation, and Galina Maksimović from the Reconstruction Women's Fund in Serbia. So first to Lida. Lida, tell us about your work, but also the challenges that you think peace builders face in building sustainable peace in their contexts.
Thank you, Dylan. Hello, everyone. It's really nice to be here today and be part of this conversation. I'm really looking forward to the discussion that we will have and to hearing all of the opinions and thinking around the topic. So as for me, I'm a feminist peace activist from Armenia, and I work on women, peace and security agenda and localizing the agenda in especially the bordering sites of Armenia. I also work towards conflict prevention. We do a lot of advocacy work and public diplomacy, but something that I am very excited that we are currently working on feminist peace agenda as a collective process. And we are thinking what feminist peace movement in Armenia and perhaps even the region, hopefully, would look like in the coming years. And as you can expect, there are a lot of issues that peace builders are facing locally. And I have a huge list to share, but I had to prioritize for the sake of time. And because I'm also part of the co-creation process of a global peace campaign that Peace Direct initiated and gave space to 10 peace builders to work on this process, I would like to also provide those challenges that peace builders face that are not only mine, but are shared by other peace builders worldwide. And to start, number 1 is a kind of main issue that is the lack of recognition. because we all, this one kind of problem that we all faced and recognized and also united was this lack of recognition, because the work we do locally is not seen. It's very difficult sometimes to measure the impact, especially when we're working towards prevention of different crises or conflicts. Sometimes a lot of peace builders have to work not so much visibly for the security reasons. Sometimes they're not visible to international organizations, movements, and donors, and this is creating the environment of where are the peace builders, who are the peace builders, and in the meantime, peace builder is not one identity, right? We are very diverse, we have different identities, we are part of different intersecting movements locally and internationally that is just not seen and not recognized. And there are also other subsequent challenges, such as lack of funding, for example, that comes along with the not being recognized, because again, a lot of donors do not see the work, there is no connection, there is a lot of huge information gap. And also the funding that is available for peace builders usually comes through humanitarian funding or very limited type of funding that is tied with a lot of bureaucracy work that requires long applications and log frames, that is making our work very challenging. So one issue is lack of funding. The other one is all the barriers that we face towards accessing this funding. Along with that, we also need to worry about our safety and security. Because as peace builders, we work in spaces that have conflict, crisis, oppressive laws, sometimes authoritarian regimes and governments, surveillance, limited freedoms like freedom of expression, and it's creating a lot of security issues that needs to be addressed. Another issue that is very close to my heart is that peace builders are not part of decision making, although they're working with the groups that are most affected by the wars and crisis and conflict. We are having hard time to sit around the negotiation table and influence peace agreements or negotiations, and it's making the work really hard, and it's making it very difficult to engage all these historically excluded groups into the peace processes that is going to directly affect their lives. Mental health is something else, because we work very hard, long hours, with lots of travels within our countries to rural areas, outside of the countries to, talk to different other activists and donors and international stakeholders. It's a lot of writing and reading and facilitating, thinking, strategizing with very small window of, mental health care and access to that. And last but not least, there is gap in coordinated action across different movements, across different contexts as well, because sometimes we are so much focused on our unique contexts and conflicts and trying to come up with effective strategies to prevent conflicts or address conflicts, etc. There is not much room to talk to other movements and to get better understanding of challenges of other peace builders in different contexts. And whenever we do, we identify that actually there are a lot of similarities in struggles, and there could be a lot of coordination done to make our work a little easier and strategies a bit more effective. Obviously, there is a lot more challenges, but these are the ones that I wanted to highlight today, and happy to speak more later. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lida. A very long list of challenges that I guess you face in your own work, as well as that you say that you have talked to your peers and this team of this group of local peace builders that are part of this global campaign. Could I put you on the spot, Lida, and just ask you, of those that you mentioned, and maybe there isn't one that's more difficult than the others, but what's the most difficult, intractable challenge that they face, I mean, peace builders face? You said lack of recognition, visibility, funding, safety and security, not part of decision making, the mental health issue, lack of coordinated action. Are there any of them that you think are sort of the main sort of foundational challenges that peace builders everywhere experience?
Yes, I believe the main and foundational one is lack of recognition, just only because all of these other challenges are coming from this one, like lack of challenges and everything. And also because of lack of recognition, we then have difficulty to have the tools and resources, means, and the support to be able to effectively cope with these challenges. This is why I would like to put the lack of recognition at the center of all the challenges that I shared.
Thank you, Lida. Very, very interesting. So we'll come back to you soon, I'm sure. But I'd like to introduce Patrick. So Patrick works for the Robert Bosch Foundation. Patrick, you've heard what Lida said. Tell us a little bit about the Robert Bosch Foundation and what, not only why the foundation is on this journey to support local peace builders, but also, reflect on the challenges that you see peace builders experiencing from the work that the Robert Bosch Foundation does.
Yes, thank you, Dylan. And I hope that my connection is good enough so that you can hear me. Okay, that's good. Yes. Very happy to talk to you this morning. The Robert Bosch Foundation undertook a very thorough strategic review in like 2019, 2020. And since then, we have like basically a new peace portfolio under our umbrella department of global issues. And from the beginning, we thought in that team, how can we actually make a meaningful contribution to the peace building field, knowing that compared to many other donors in the area, especially the bilateral donors, of course, our capacities, both when it comes to people and to money, are relatively limited. So we may not have as much money, we may not have as much people. What we do have as a private foundation is relative freedom of how we spend the money, and also when it comes to the regulations that are attached to receiving the money. So very early on, we decided that we wanted to do a locally led approach in our peace building portfolio and really try to figure out how can a foundation based in Germany with relatively limited capacities invest in initiatives in conflict areas where we really manage to give the power and the ownership over what is done in those initiatives, what the focus should be, and how the work on the ground is actually done really to the people who are actually doing the work and who are directly affected by the conflict and its solutions. So that's what we set out to do. COVID was a real issue on the way implementing it, but I think all our initiatives are now up and running. We are currently active in the Western Balkans, in the Middle East, and in the Sahel. And of course, in all three regions, we of course experience the issues that Lida talked about as well. And we do know that that we have to get better as well in not being part of those problems and issues as well. And sometimes it's not that easy actually for us to figure out where can we just change our conduct and how we do work. We really try to get better there, and I think we have made progress there, and simply doing much more easily accessible funding, being much more careful about reaching out to people, organizations, areas that may have a hard time simply applying to a Northern-based donor that they've never heard about, and making us more accessible to them. I think we have made progress there and are still on the road to improving further. And at the same time, we are trying to figure out what other regulations that come from the state side or the system side that we cannot just overcome and change from one day to the other, especially when it comes to German tax laws, for example, that comes with foundation work. And so we also try to be advocates there, basically, and trying to really change some of the foundations of the system as well. So one might say we are kind of trying to shut up when we work with our local actors and listen much more and learn much more there, and be much more vocal when it comes to advocacy, especially with bilateral donors. In our case, specifically the EU and the German government as well. Because basically what Lida said, all of that we see that, and we hear it. And one of the issues that we have, for example, is that it's in many of our contexts, there are really great peace building activists on the ground that may not be organized in any sort of formal organization. And it might even be dangerous for them if they would try to attempt to do that. So that's one of our pressing issues, really, is to get money and funds and help to those who are doing that kind of work, who may be part of a really big social movement, but just not of an organization. And that's something that really our regulations did not really foresee when they were set up. And I think the German foundation charity laws and everything like that comes originally from some way how they try to sponsor the work of railroads, I think in the late 1900s. So you can see where the problems come from, that simply some of the regulations, they tend to survive for a really long time and never really fit what is actually being done on the ground. But yeah, we try to do that. As I said, we try to be humble there as well, and simply also be in the background wherever it's possible, but then also become vocal where we can, or where others, in particular our local partners, think we can make a difference if we actually speak up from with our organizational background. So yeah, maybe that's just for the start. I'm very happy to answer all questions later if there's any more specifics, but just as a starter.
Patrick, thank you so much. I really liked what you said when you mentioned that you try to shut up when you work with your partners, which is really refreshing to hear, because I imagine it's not the norm right now. Donors and those who hold a lot of power tend to speak a lot, and I think it's really refreshing to hear that, and how you're trying to be humble. I'm going to ask you one question before we move on to Galina. There are very few foundations, private foundations, that fund local peace building. Why is that? In your experience, when you are in these spaces, you may be one of the few foundations, private philanthropic organizations funding local peace building. What do you think is stopping other foundations from doing the same?
Yeah, actually in Germany, I think we're actually the only one. And one of the reasons might be in Germany, but I think that's also true for others, is that it's relatively hard to measure the progress that we're making with our funding. And we're also responsible towards our stakeholders, our board, people that are sometimes very far away from the topics that we're actually working on. And I think sometimes there's the fear that we cannot really show that our work actually does make a difference. In the German context, I think there's maybe also the particularity that I guess most of you know that Germany has a relatively difficult relationship with engaging in international relations in general, and has still not really figured out its role there. Like it's obviously an economic, a big economic player, but when it comes to international systems, relations, everything like that, it's still, Germany tends to shy away from the power that it may have in that space. So that may be one of the reasons in the German context as well. But really, the fear that we cannot really show what kind of difference do we make. Are we meddling also maybe in conflicts where we have no place in meddling? Of course, that's also one of the questions that we also asked ourselves, and how do we actually choose the areas that we're working in. Some of those questions you cannot really answer satisfactorily, I think. When we were looking, we knew from the beginning we only have the capacities to fund in 3 regions. And how do you choose which one you're going to engage? Isn't that already an exercise of power that we simply shouldn't do? And of course, you can ask that question. And at some point, we simply got really pragmatic and also kind of just try to follow up on some things that the foundation had already done. There was a history there. And where there was already expertise in the team as well. So we tried not to make it rocket science, basically, and then to pretend that we have this great process of finding the perfect regions for our kind of work. So also being honest about the questions that we know we have to kind of be a little bit pragmatic about. Yes, and I think those are some of the questions and processes that are sometimes really hard to put into words as well, and especially to explain to those who may not be so close to the topic itself. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons why people shy away from it as well.
Thanks, Patrick. As you were speaking, I was writing down a few of your words there, and I think fascinating to hear this challenge that you talk about being hard to measure the progress of our funding. And it's something I think peace building faces in a lot of contexts. But it also reminded me of the Shift the Power manifesto. The manifesto, in the third point of the manifesto, is we have to change how we approach and seek to measure the notion of success. I think we are preoccupied with certain types of measures of success, and if we can't tick those off, then we can't measure any success. And actually, I think Shift the Power is working on a number of things, and I think that we'll be talking about this at the summit as well. What do we define as success? How can we measure what really matters? And I think it takes a very creative and brave foundation to move away from just the standard log frames and the standard way of indicators of success. So really glad to hear that you're being brave and being humble at the same time, which is another part of the manifesto for change as well. Galina, over to you. So we'd love to hear about the Reconstruction Women's Fund in Serbia, and tell us, your experience of the challenges that local peace builders face and the work that they do in your context.
Thank you, Dylan. Reconstruction Women's Fund is almost 20 years old. Next year is our big birthday. And we emerged from a feminist anti-war movement after the wars have already been over. But that's when the real work has begun, in building peace, rebuilding peace, in fact. Since the beginning of our work, what we have in focus is supporting and maintaining a platform, a feminist platform against war, militarism, racism, and nationalism, which are all problems that stem from war, and they are here to stay even during peacetime. We work mainly with local organizations, very small ones, formal and non-formal ones, in diverse corners of Serbia, especially those corners that are slightly hidden, isolated, yet hold some wonderful people who are leading changes locally. All of us from the fund are either still activists or were activists, so we have that both sides. In fact, we are a part of the movement and we are supporting the movement, which is as great as it can be tricky. When it comes to challenges, as the fund, we are of course struggling to find flexible assets for regranting, which is the most needed. But I would also say that we lack those funders who are recognizing not just the fact that we are peace builders, but who are recognizing how feminist role intersects with peace builders' role, and how diverse types of marginalization actually connect to post-conflict society, and how, for instance, our key issues, nationalism, militarism, racism, all connect. So the lack of recognition is a challenge in our context as well, but in a slightly different way. It is not only a problem coming from donors' side. Sometimes the activists also lack the space to articulate their position as somebody who works at the intersection of diverse problems. There is also, of course, the challenge of maintaining peace work when we are not in a war. When it's been 24 years since the last conflict that we experienced in this territory. But we cannot forget that the absence of war doesn't mean peace, and that it takes time to heal, takes time to rebuild communities. We are far from that, honestly, because at the political level, what is challenged, when I say political, I mean at the parliamentary level, at the government level, what we are facing is that many of the key figures from the 90s who were one way or another involved with wars, they are in power now. They are taking the leading positions, and this includes our president, who was quite active in the war as a Minister of Information, or as we say it colloquially, Minister of Propaganda. So the politics of the 90s still survive in some other forms and are crumbling our peace. Another thing that we find challenging is how there is a problem to remember how the economy and peace economic stability and peace are connected. And we are easily distracted by a bunch of issues that are marginal in a way, while forgetting how all the warmongering narratives that are still active in the past.
Looks like we've lost Galina. Let's give her a few moments to reconnect.
Some recent
Galina, we lost you for the last 30 seconds.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So regarding specific conflicts, the latest that we had were well, I don't know how to even define it. There were some conflicts between Serbs and Kosovo Albanians. This happened just a few months ago. The Serbs who attacked Kosovo Albanians were actually a paramilitary structure, and this is another problem. We are heavily armed. We have some residuals of paramilitary structures. Other right-wing actors who are very violent. And when you analyze it, it all comes back to the war times and the nationalism and militarism that stemmed from that side.
Thank you, Galina. Really interesting to hear the perspectives from a part of the world where, you know, it was on our TV screens a lot some time ago, and as you say now, there isn't maybe an active war, but as you mentioned, and I think very helpful to remind us, you know, an absence of war is not peace, and I think it reminds me of the definition of positive peace versus negative peace. And for those of you outside the peace building world, you know, positive peace is a much more all-embracing concept, which really is about building strong institutions and building safer societies, and not just the absence of violence. And that in itself, I think, links to the manifesto, the Shift the Power manifesto. The first point on the Shift the Power manifesto is embrace a vision of a good society built around core values of equality, democracy, and sustainability. And that's, in effect, positive peace. I mean, that's why I think anyone who supports Shift the Power is also a peace builder. I want to ask you one question before we then invite all of us to join the Jamboards. You talked about the struggle to find flexible funding for peace efforts in the region. Why is flexible funding important?
Oh, well, if we don't have flexible funding, if there is imposed thematic funding, restricted funding, we oftentimes end up in a tunnel of projectitis, of short-term activities that do not reach to desired outcomes, and we don't have continuity of either peace building or other social changes. Flexible funding also is crucial to, you know, just enabling spaces for peace building activities. It is important for movements to feel like movements and not like project making machines, and I don't know how to say it, but just final reproducers of some visions that were created at the top.
Thank you, Galina.
Thank you, Jennifer.
So we are not project making machines. And I'm sure something like that is said in the manifesto as well, around, you know, the dominance of a sort of projectized way of working, which is not how social change happens. We all know that social change doesn't happen in 6-month projects with log frames and outputs. So folks, you've heard now 3 wonderful speakers and the challenges that they face in supporting peace building efforts. We're now going to invite you all to join the Jamboard, and I think my colleague Jasmine is going to put a link in the chat. So what I want you to do is have a click on this link. You'll see it there. It takes you to a Google form. Now the Google form has 3 pages. Each page has 1 question. Now, what we'd like you to do is to try and answer the question. So we're going to give you about 5 to 7 minutes, and there'll be a bit of background music. You can switch off your camera if you want, but please stay on the call. And what we're asking you is 3 questions. The first question is, what challenges do you see in building sustainable peace in your communities? Now, you've heard some of those challenges. Lida and Galina in particular mentioned some of those challenges, but you may have others. And if you agree with some of those, then put them down with what you heard from Lida and from Galina. So that's the first on the first page. The second page is, what is your experience in working with global North actors, INGOs, funders, etc., to further your work? So good, bad, indifferent. So how have you worked with global North actors? And is it a good experience or a bad experience? And the third is, what do you see as the links between Shift the Power and peace building? So we'd love to hear your thoughts, if you have any, on what you see as the links between Shift the Power and peace building. So you have the link to the Jamboard. We're going to have about 5 to 7 minutes where you use the notes. On the left-hand side, you'll see that there are sticky notes on the left-hand side, and Jasmine just put the instructions in the chat. So use as many as you want, put as many ideas down, and Patrick, one of our speakers, is going to then try to summarize what is coming out of this conversation, and we'll open it up to a conversation as well. So over to you all. We'd love to see what you have to say about those 3 questions. Thank you. Folks, we have 3 minutes left, so can I just encourage you to also look at the second and third questions? If you have a look at the Jamboard at the top, there's a little arrow that takes you to the second and third slides, and there are questions there. There are some answers there. It's great to see the answers that are already coming up and the insights that you're putting onto the first board. Please have a chance to think about answers to the other 2 questions as well. 3 minutes left. Just half a minute left, everyone. Okay, we'll all reassemble. Obviously, we could have spent another 20 minutes doing that, and I'm sure lots of you have lots of other thoughts on those 3 questions. I'm now going to hand it over to Patrick. Patrick, you've been watching the sticky notes be placed on the various boards. What do you think of some of the key themes? What strikes you as the interesting points and themes coming out of those 3 questions?
Yes, I mean, on the really on the first question, you can see like this triangle, or probably more of simply of the environment that you all have to operate between the particularities of your conflict, that of course are already hard enough to handle, and then the relationship to international actors, donors, governments, and so on, where there's always the power dynamic going on at the same time. And then basically the third, the question of how you actually conduct peace building yourself. And that's actually one of the points that I would like maybe to start one of our first discussions on. A lot of you wrote that that there's a certain need for peace builders also to understand the pace of the transformation, how processes are going, how complex they are to measure, and yeah, that's simply one of the points that I wanted to use maybe to start off a conversation on about, because from a donor's perspective, a lot of organizations tell us as well then that when we like try to go there like with an basically with a listening attitude and trying to figure out ways how we can actually shift some power and hand over power, that they say, well, we have to unlearn parts of the old system as well, and that it's sometimes a very tricky position, because maybe the Bosch Foundation now tries to do something differently, but all our other donors don't. And so we're kind of also caught between those two different ideas of how a donor behaves. And so maybe I would like to invite some of you simply to share and elaborate on your thoughts that you have written down here on how you think organizations on the ground also have to differently approach peace building in a changing system, and also in relation to shift of power. Just have to try to handle between the different.
There's an invitation there from Patrick for anyone to share their thoughts on what changes in, I guess, mindsets and approaches peace builders need to take to unlearn some of the ways of working that have been built into the system. Is that's what you're asking,
Yes.
Patrick? Who would like to share any thoughts on that?
So I'm probably going to totally mispronounce it, but Bursu?
Yeah, thank you so much. I am now in Paris. I'm on the road. Normally I'm living in Germany. Sorry, I will work today here. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
In this transformation process, everything is changing, as we know, in the world. And peace also, like peace building understanding is also on this track. And what I shared also in this notes I wrote, just nature-based solutions become a kind of a method that we are using to build a trust in between communities, and while tackling with climate change. So for instance, this is one example, empirical example, how we are just finding new kind of methods and scientific approaches for a common future. It's one way to think beyond everything and use nature as a kind of dialogue method. So just I want to share such an experience with you, because the old methods, what we the pressure is so high around the world. Polarization, misinformation, way with our own creativity, not only experts, but also who can really be the part of the peace building process, artists, communities, scientists, they are all welcome now. Just this is a kind of an emergency process, so we shouldn't lose more time to discuss such issues. I'm based in Germany now, and I'm working as a peace worker. Just I would like to share such an experiences that we started also in urban transformation process with institutions and all the diverse actors in the cities. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. Is there anyone else who wants to jump in? Otherwise, I think you can really connect that, what you just said, also with our second slide, basically, and what a lot of you have written down there about the challenges you see in building sustainable peace in your communities. Now with the second one about the global north actors, especially funders and INGOs, because I think there's a certain connection there that you can really see that we're already kind of in a changing system. I think a lot of actors have acknowledged that something has to change on all sorts of levels, from governments over donors to organizations and the people on the ground itself. But we're obviously at the start of the road, basically. I mean, some may be further than others, but we're not really there yet. And I think that's also reflected in the second slide, because a lot of what you've written down here goes into a similar direction, right? That there's a certain understanding and attempt, especially by donors as well, to change, but that nobody seems to be really there yet. That like patronizing relationships still exist. There is obviously still a power dynamic that simply cannot be overlooked. There's a donor's agenda that is sometimes, I guess, hard, to really make transparent and actually talk about. And yeah, that there's also, I mean, there's also a more negative comment where it's really still a problem that donors simply do not understand the context that they are operating in, working in. What I would be interested in is how far do you all think that this process of sharing more power and shifting power is a genuine process, and how it's undertaken right now? Because in our work, we really realized over the last years that a lot of actors, and especially INGOs and donors, are making promises that the system has to change and that they are also participating in this change. But I'm also hearing more and more voices who say it sometimes seems like it's a new list that has to be ticked off, basically. That like some say it's like Northern Guild or White Guild, or simply something new that we need for our work to feel meaningful, and that we feel we have done everything right, but that does not really translate into that much change on the ground and for you as local activists and local peace builders. So maybe that as another invitation for some thoughts. And Naval, I hand over to you.
Thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for everybody. And I work in a program called Towards Enduring Peace in Sudan. But unfortunately, we didn't enduring any peace. You know that currently there is a blood war going on in Sudan, and our program is working for the last 9 years. And most of the staff, or all the staff, are locally, including the chief of party. And we engage with a lot of peace activists and the local community. We work at little community level. It is community-led program. And in this peace building, we made a lot of success in small communities by through these peace committees. They settle their conflicts and even mediate in their neighbors' community conflicts. They settle it. And our committee involved both men and women, and they were very active on that. But unfortunately, sometimes the donors, what do you call it, the administrative and procurement and the finance restrictions and accountability, it make it very difficult for the local people who cannot read and write, and even they cannot speak English. It's very difficult to write a project proposal. So we tried to do some shift. We translated like the project proposal into Arabic, so that those who can write can be able to write the proposal. And we are working rigorously in trying to enhance the capacity of the local community. And we work a lot with youth leaders and women networks, and they are really progress. They use that, we work with them, and we talk about, of course, also the we have a civic education program related to this project, in addition also to trauma healing, because there is a lot of war, a lot of problem, most of the people are traumatized. So we link trauma with peace, with enhancing the capacity of the communities. And now the youth that we are trained, they are leading the process of trying to neutralize their communities from being engaged in the current war. The two parties who are currently having the war in the country, they are trying to recruit the youth to their side. But the youth that we work, they are really work very hard to neutralize their community, not to engage, and to have peace. And they are working towards this propaganda machine of hate speech, and they are doing very well. So what I said, I have written large scale somewhere in one of the questions. When the conflict is in a small area, it is very easy to handle it through the community, but like a large scale, what is going on currently in Sudan, it is very hard for the community to handle it, and even the government or those military, especially those who are fighting, they don't listen to the civilian, and they ignore the views of the civilian, of the community. They are just listening to themselves. And as all of you know, and following that, the current crisis in Sudan, most of our neighbor countries, international communities, they are trying to mediate, but so far, 8 months continue, and there is a lot of bombardment, killing, social, gender-based violence, a lot of human rights violations, and they are not listening to anybody. And we hope we will manage. We are still working hard that to raise the voices of the voiceless and to make kind of pressure on them, but if they can listen to the civilian. And thank you.
Lida, I just hand over to you. And then we can summarize maybe.
Yes, thanks, Patrick. I also wanted to quickly reflect on the fact that attempting to apply shift the power and practice shift the power, many donors are also launching participatory grant-making mechanisms or initiating movement-led decision-making, which is great. But there are also other challenges connected to this. When trying to be more participatory, they still acquire lengthy applications, and there is not much respect for time, because a lot of local organizations, in relations to the donor organization and through the process of receiving grants, still put and invest a lot of their time and efforts and emotional labor. And then sometimes, because the funding is limited many times, they end up not receiving the funding or end up receiving small funding. So just like kind of thinking and reflecting through the questions, I believe that there is still need for a lot of thinking and brainstorming and strategizing around how we do actually shift the power, and if we're embedding different participatory mechanisms, how is that reflecting on the time that the local organizations are investing in the process?
Yes, and what both of you said is also deeply resonating with me, especially when it comes to like really complex and even large scale conflicts, where it becomes even harder, like to even get a overview about what is going on, and also getting in contact with the local and directly affected people, and that totally clashes, of course, with the thinking that has been so present in like the donor landscape for decades, I guess. And also like we tried to tackle that by approaching our new strategies with like, we have at least 10 years in our regions where all the projects can run for at least 10 years, and so that this time pressure is not as high as it used to be. But we're already realizing after COVID and everything, we are quickly approaching almost our half time, and you simply realize that in peace building, even 10 years is not the kind of long-term planning that we had hoped for in the beginning, and it still poses a lot of issues for the people on the ground as well. Angela, I hand over to you.
I thought there was another hand before me, but no, I don't see it. Thank you, Patrick.
Naval's hand, I think, was still up.
Oh, okay. No, I was hearing like the last intervention, and I was thinking that I have been feeling, I don't know, for the last 8 years, like an urgency. Thinking about how are we going to maybe not just brainstorm, but also try, experiment, and risk a lot on how are we going to design and manage these actions that we do within the peace building field, because I do believe that we inherit like an architecture from the private sector on managing projects that it doesn't work. And we all peace builders know that it doesn't work. And I think that we share this with the Shift the Power movement, because we are all about systems transformation processes. And when we are engaging in those processes, we know that they're not linear, their outcomes are not tangible or not tangible for the first years. And we know that they have to be coherent in the relationships, the everyday relationships that you were just pointing out about taking care of others, about timing. But we keep continue using the same old structures on how to design, how to make goals, to locate funding, how to monitor, how to sometimes even how to do mail from the traditional ways. And we are managing institutions and projects under those patterns, and it just won't work in that way. And so I don't know, because I feel also that we are not like as social practitioners, I guess we are not so keen to get into those details of management, or like the structures. That's a topic that we are not usually engaged in. And we are usually also like even trying, like local institutions also try to avoid being in those positions, like taking decisions as directors or coordinators, because the ones who realized this, they just like decided to take a step back and remain within the community direct work. So how are we going to address that huge challenge of beginning, like to think about something that we sometimes don't want to, just because that's not our expertise, and it might be like an umbrella that connects us, not only from the peace building field, but also with the development wider field. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I can also deeply relate what you said, and Dylan also posted in the chat about what we inherited from the private sector there. And that's really also like when at the foundation, we talk about measuring our success and measuring systems change and everything. You can quickly see that especially some stakeholders have a hard time accepting the long-term thinking behind it. And very quickly, there's the question about, but isn't there some sort of KPI that we can also write in some sort of report that kind of makes it understandable for the person not directly connected, for example, to peace building work. And of course, that's the same is true for many other global issues that organizations are working on. Yeah, and what you say about 100% that it's about competition. And actually, that would be something that I would find interesting for some of you to follow up on, maybe when it comes to this relationship also with donors, but also in the changing system. Do you think we have made progress on that front when it comes to this competition-based approach to find new programs and new projects and peace building? Or do you think we're still stuck in that framework? Because that's something that has been discussed for like at least 20 years now, and we should have made some progress there already. Anyone who would like to follow up on? Dylan.
Thanks, Patrick. I don't think we've made any progress, sadly. I think the nature of the funding that is still available for most activities, whether they are peace building activities, development activities, community cohesion activities, anything, you name it, I think we have designed a system that encourages competition over cooperation or collaboration, and that therefore then increases the risk of organizations not seeking out allies in their own context, because they are competing for the very small amount of funds. So it's not just about what Angela said, which is the capital, the sort of private sector approach, which doesn't work, right? So this private sector architecture is definitely there, but it's also about the quantity of funding. If you only give 7% or 8% of the global funding for CSOs goes to local organizations, the rest of it goes to INGOs, right? That's a scandal. So if only a very small percent of the overall funding for CSOs goes to local organizations, then of course we're building in a kind of hyper-competitive environment and a sort of scarcity mindset, because all these organizations are fighting for scraps of funding, whereas the INGOs have the enormous slice of the cake. Almost the whole cake is theirs. So I think despite, and I think someone said it on this slide, in fact, we can see it here, very good, bilaterals and some NGOs talk localization, but their systems make it almost impossible to do this genuinely. And I think that's the reality, is that we are still so far away from where we need to be. And, maybe the rhetoric is the start, maybe just acknowledging the problem is a good start, but when do we actually see the change? I think, from the peace builders that I speak to, they're getting increasingly frustrated and fed up because they hear all the talk, but the change, there's no change or very little change.
Thank you. I would just hand over to Galina and then Stephen.
Thank you. Actually, Dylan mentioned what I wanted to say about the percents that reach the ground eventually. So this is my main indicator that we are progressing really barely. We are progressing on paper, but even if we just look at this Jamboard, we still see people discontent with basic relationships with donors. And I think that relationships are crucial besides the quality of funding. And based on this, we're very, very far away from that. And the other thing is that we're not progressing in terms of building new relationships. So what I've noticed, at least in our region, is that donors are frequently hesitant to take risks and start working with some newer groups or less known groups, and choose to, go with the easier flow and work with those who are proven to have some capacities, proven to have some track records, and chances for new visions of peace are not given. So yeah, we're progressing only on paper, I would say.
Stephen. We cannot hear you yet, Stephen, I think.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, great.
Yeah, so I just wanted to pick up on the point on collaboration. I think I broadly agree with what others have said, that it hasn't shifted that much, for all the talk about collaboration, but I don't think that's because organizations are not trying. I think there are some examples where collaboration is happening within context or across context, but it's, as Dylan was saying, the system doesn't incentivize that. It's very hard to get resources to form partnerships across a range of organizations. It's very difficult to share resources between organizations. And, that means that our collective impact is a lot less. So I think one of the things that we need to be doing is for advocating for funding mechanisms that devolve the decision-making around how peacebuilding funds are spent to coalitions of organizations that can use that more collaboratively within context and, move across different levels of the society and have more impact together. But I think we need to be more forceful as a community about making that point together, because we get into these bilateral conversations where we end up having to push our own interests to financial viability at the expense of saying something collective together about how how we could share those funds. And I just wanted to make one other quick point on this. I think one thing that we have to be aware of or concerned about or reacting to, which is if you look at, history, these terms like local ownership and then localization and now decolonization, they arise with a lot of energy in the sector from particular types of organizations that want to change things, but they get captured by power holders. And the power holders are sometimes, quite well-intentioned people within bilateral donor organizations. And sometimes they're not well-intentioned people in private development companies or larger NGOs that have a machine for raising funds and can use this language to gain really large amounts of funding. And then the way that they create instruments for using that, like, their monitoring evaluation frameworks, their contracting agreements with local partners, they do anything but localize. So they're kind of talking the talk, but they're not walking the walk at all. And it sucks all the life out of the movement and makes it a completely empty term. So I think we have a responsibility to push back against that and demonstrate something different, a very different way of working, and then like speak back to those disingenuous examples and call them what they actually are, so that the whole movement doesn't look bad as a result.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And yeah, and I think that's the experience a lot of us share. I think that there's so many people who want to push in the right direction, even within one organization, but somehow our own architecture prevents us from making like the progress that we want to have, at least in a short period of time. Thank you all so much. I think especially our third slide, we didn't discuss that too much yet, but that's certainly something you can take with us to Bogota, I think, and to keep in mind for all the discussions there. And I hand over back to Dylan. Thank you.
Patrick, thank you so much for facilitating that. What a great conversation. And I think if we'd had another hour, we'd get into even more of the detail and the meat of that. But it's a wonderful start to an ongoing conversation that we must have. And I think, Stephen, your last point was very well taken. So many things that you said resonated with me in terms of, how we need to better advocate for a different sort of change, but we're also fighting for our own survival. So that sort of limits our ability to do that. And as you say, important change agendas get co-opted, and we have to think about how to manage that. So we haven't got much time left. So I'm now going to ask our three speakers, what's next? We've got this great information on the Jamboards. You've heard the conversation, all three of you. We've got to Shift the Power Summit in Bogota. And of course, after Bogota, there will be continued conversations about all of this as it relates to peace building. So, Lida, what is the conversation that we need to have in Bogota based on what you've just heard? What's the key takeaways from your perspective that you've heard from either from the post-it notes or from the conversation itself? What are you going to take away from this, and what do we need to make sure happens in Bogota?
Sure, Dylan. So the main thing is to put movements and peace builders at the center of everything, of grant making, of programs, of how the philanthropic ecosystem is built. And conversations I believe we need to have in Bogota is around, we need new funding mechanisms, or at least new structures and approaches in existing grant making mechanisms, where and I feel like a broken record by this time, because I spoke about this so much in so many different platforms, that we need long-term core multi-year funding as local organizing. That is crucial. And we need more trust as local organizations, because the current systems and structures do not show much trust towards the local organizing. And when I say trust, it also means reassessing and rethinking the risk. Many donor organizations think of risk as we don't know, there is a lot of uncertainty, how this money will go, what will happen. Just having more trust in this, and just like thinking, what is actual risk, and isn't it too risky to starve the local grassroots organizing? Where will we end up if there are no effective, strong, resilient local peace builders on the ground doing the job what they do, because I think this is the main risk. And the final one, I would encourage to have conversations around do not expect quick results from us, because as we discussed today, and I see everyone agrees, change doesn't happen overnight, and it's a long process in general. But when it comes to peace building particularly, it's even a longer process. It can take a few decades even, but it's a process and a journey we have to go through, and working with more patience and trust and not expecting traditional quick results would be very helpful and very healthy for the local movements.
Lida, that's wonderful. Do not expect quick results. We need patience, we need trust, and peace building are a process. Galina, over to you.
Thank you. So we haven't had time to go over a third slide, but what I found interesting was how Shift the Power was understood and named in this slide. So it was called a space, a movement, a collaborative tool, a link, agreement, creation, peace building, evolution. So with all of these understandings of what Shift the Power is, I think we can do anything and go anywhere. But what I found during the first two slides was quite similar to what Lida said, with accent on rethinking and redefining processes of funding, but also relationships. Also at the grassroots level, what are our relationships and what are our limits and challenges? From safety to a lack of engagement and lack of trust. But the central part for me remains creating kind of a bridge between local actors and those working in broader conditions, broader geographical conditions. So bridging the gap between the local and international, and see how one feeds another. And also doing it in the good spirit, in the spirit of trust, equality primarily, in order to tackle those power dynamics that we are talking about for many, many years right now.
Thank you, Galina, and wonderful to hear the reinforcing of some key messages there that Lida mentioned as well, and really helpful to remind us of some of the wonderful comments that were placed on the third page, which we didn't get to, and I just wanted to read one of them out. So this relates to the question we asked, which was, what do we see as the links between Shift the Power and peace building? And someone said there is something about the quiet work of creating courageous spaces, navigating complexity and diversity with humans and human relationships at its heart, beyond the binaries. Beautifully written, whoever put that down, and I think that's exactly the alignment between peace building practice and Shift the Power, and I hope we can do that at the summit. Patrick, you got 2 minutes, and then we're going to hand over to Jenny to thank and wrap up.
And I simply want to follow up on what Lida and Galina just said. And I think us, from a donor perspective, our responsibility at Bogota, I think, will simply be to walk through the halls there basically and listen and soak up as much as possible and be open to criticism. I hope that we will find the spaces as well where you can really give it to us as well, and what you would like to share with us and what we simply need to do in order to make good on the promise of actually also doing our part in changing the system. And then also connect with other donors, of course, who have already made themselves be part of that road or that process, so that we can also join our power, and also fight against the constraints that we feel in our systems and in our organizations, and make progress there. Thank you all.
Thank you, Patrick. And there's important words that we need to consider as we go into Bogota. And I also just want to recognize the comments that are coming into the chat. Stephen saying maybe members of this movement should be issuing a call for donor proposals to support our collaborative peace building efforts. So a challenge to donors about doing things differently. Thank you all for, I think, what's been a really, really interesting, rich, thought-provoking conversation, and so much incredible material that we need to take on board into the planning of the Shift the Power Summit and the peace building session that will be there. So this is the beginning of a conversation. We'll continue it in Bogota, and then there'll be further conversations, no doubt. So thank you all for your participation, but I'd like to just hand over to Jenny for the final words.
Thank you, Dylan. Fascinating conversation. Thank you, everybody. It's really reinforced for me the importance of the work that happens that is not seen. It's about relationships. It's the quiet work at the edges of the system. Shift the Power's origins came out of the community philanthropy discourse, but actually there are so many similarities. It's about naming things that aren't named, building connections between people, the role of trust, of behaviors at a very local level. And I see enormous possibilities of being able to make the invisible visible, but then to organize it, to make it the only way, that actually you can't solve complex problems with big, simple answers. It really is, you know, small, big problems require multiple small solutions to it. And so I think starting to build this narrative in which we all gain and more people see themselves, whether they define themselves as peace builders or environmental activists, actually creating this bigger space is really exciting. So really thank you for Peace Direct and others for coordinating this event, because I think this is about the moment of getting rid of some of our boundaries and actually seeing a bigger us, and that the summit is a way for us to do that and then consider what we do moving forward. But it's really exciting to see the coming together of these different communities, and we look forward to seeing some of you in Bogota, and you know, the journey continues, right? So whether you're physically in Colombia or not, we are all together in this. So thank you so much for hosting this webinar and the great contributions.
Thank you, Jenny, and wonderful to finish off on that idea of making the invisible visible, which I think reminds us of what Lida first mentioned as we started off this conversation 90 minutes ago, which was the recognition of the work that local actors are doing. And that's something that I think unites all of the activists and supporters and allies of Shift Power. So thank you very much for your participation. It's been a great conversation. Looking forward to continuing it with some of you in person in Bogota. And for those who won't be there, don't worry, there will be further conversations that will take place online and into the near future. So thank you so much, and have a great day.